Let me preface the video with the disclaimer that this is not another attack on the design decision to have lands in the main deck. Although I still think that this is a bug, not a feature. This video is looking at the availability of lands in paper. It is actually a little baffling to realize how many lands have touched the ban list over the years. In conjunction with mana acceleration cards, mana sources might be the most populated category on the list. Although, card advantage is also a common category. Lands are at the center of the game, and with nearly every card requiring mana to be cast. A few lands have hit the list simply for offering too much fast mana, like Mishra's Workshop, Gaia's Cradle, Sarah's Sanctum, Tolarian Academy, and Eye of Ugin. These are understandable bans, as mana acceleration is dangerous, and the 5 cards share the theme of generating more than one mana of the same color, with some sort of stipulation. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to basics. The basic lands enter untapped and supply 1 mana of their color. There is no restriction on the number of basic lands which can be played in a deck. Do keep in mind that the rest of the lands mentioned in this video will be at a maximum of 4 copies per deck. Outside of corner cases like Dryad Arbor cheating, the card art does not matter on the basic lands. Functionally, they are identical, but there is a degree of preference in aesthetic. Foils and alternate art lands can drive up the price of a deck, but are not necessary. Personally, I think that there should be a bundle of 25 of each type of basic land released for the benefit of new players, and maybe changing the art annually for the collectors. The real problem stems from the non-basic lands, which can really add to the price of the deck. For each color you add to the deck, you decrease the consistency of your mana base. Mana fixing lands increase the consistency of your deck, making it more likely that you will have the right color mana available at the right time. Here are a few multicolored standard decks. This Gruul mana base has a playset of shock lands. Sultai plays the Pain lands and the new fetch land Fabled Passage, which is an improved version of Evolving Wilds. This Jeskai Super Friends deck plays the Pain lands, the Fabled Passages, and now the Scryland Temples. The same trend holds for Modern. Utility lands like Cavern of Souls, and the best mana-fixing lands fetching the highest prices. In the Eternal formats, there are cards like Bazaar of Baghdad, the dual lands from Alpha, and universal color fixing like Mana Confluence. Not to mention the big one, Mishra's Workshop. From this information, we can draw 2 conclusions. Utility lands can be very expensive, and as the quality of fixing improves, the land becomes more expensive. Our worst fixing is in Standard, with Pain lands, which cost you life if you do not want to fall behind in mana. The Scryland Temples put you a turn behind in mana, similar to the Gates, but compensate with the Scry effect. Moving into Modern, we have Fetch lands, which are like Fabled Passage, but at the cost of 1 life, can put an untapped basic land onto the battlefield. Mana Confluence and City of Brass are universal fixing, but cost 1 life each time. Finally, the Alpha dual lands are the best mana fixing lands, entering the battlefield untapped. Take a moment to look at the jump in power levels as we go to wider card pools. Going from costing 2 life, to tutoring a basic land for 1 life, to costing 1 life for any color, and no cost at all for a land that produces 2 colors. The price increase represents the power level increase, but still, even standard format mana bases can be quite pricey. Expensive land bases affect all players, from Johnny to Spike. Because there exist superior lands, there is an advantage to be gained from playing them. Thus, this increases demand, and supply is relatively inelastic due to a combination of artificial scarcity and print run restrictions. The market reaches equilibrium at a high price. This is a case where you can buy an advantage in Magic. It is magnified by the fact that every deck requires a mana base, and for anyone wanting to play more than 1 color, they either start with a disadvantage or have to pay an exorbitant price. So that is a verbose description of the problem. The Land Menace, if you will. But what of a solution? I always like to propose a solution to design problems, and this is not actually a design problem, just one of marketing. I propose a standard format set, non-rotating. This would be a little weird to Magic players, but in Hearthstone, there is a classic set. What if there was a set composed entirely of mana-fixing lands that was regularly reprinted and always playable in Standard? And what would be in it? The first question isn't quite so weird as you would expect, because there are a few somewhat evergreen cards. Cards like Act of Treason are consistently present in Standard formats, at least in recent memory. Yearly printings, perhaps with a different art style for each year, would likely satisfy collectors. Personally, I think the set should not be randomized, so either 1, 2, or 4 copies of each card. This is to prevent redundancy. Maybe even bundle it with the land pack I mentioned earlier. But what lands go into the land set? I would like a variety of lands. The Pain lands and Scry lands are about the same power level, and a side grade is not a bad thing. I would probably put both of these in the set. Fabled Passage or Evolving Wilds, single check lands, and maybe even gates. I acknowledge that this set ignores the lore. The contents of the set should not add to the power level or consistency of Standard. So, no alpha dual lands. This might be a bit of a design limitation when supporting monocolor with mechanics like Adamant or Devotion, and there is a restriction on design space in Standard that future lands printed cannot be better than the non-rotating lands, similar to the design restriction proposed after the alpha dual lands. Note that this restriction on land power level only applies to fixing, so that every 2-color combination is viable. This leaves a wealth of design space in utility lands. And now we return to the opening of the video, the other lands which have brushed against the ban list. Field of the Dead is the most recent example, and it functions like an enchantment rather than a traditional land, with a conditional landfall trigger creating a zombie token. Lands with additional effects have the potential to be very powerful. It is as if these lands are like a spell or enchantment that doesn't cost mana to get onto the battlefield, then offers you mana each turn. This is neutral card advantage and generates mana. Most often, these cards hurt your mana base, forcing you to play a turn behind your opponent. But if you reframe this as a 1-mana enchantment with an activated ability, it looks a lot better. And, being lands, they can fit into most decks. This hints at a bigger problem in design space, the power of colorless cards, but that is a menace still on the horizon.